The morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban street as Marcus Thompson pulled his black SUV into the familiar driveway of his home in Arlington, Virginia. After 18 months deployed in Afghanistan with Delta Force, the sight of his white picket fence and red brick house should have filled him with relief. Instead, his heart sank as he noticed something terribly wrong. A massive concrete barrier blocked his driveway entrance, and yellow construction tape fluttered in the morning breeze. Behind the barrier, he could see his front yard had been torn up, with deep trenches running across what used to be his perfectly manicured lawn. Construction equipment sat idle nearby, and temporary fencing surrounded his entire property. Marcus sat in his vehicle for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. He had been in constant communication with his wife Sarah throughout his deployment, and she had never mentioned any construction work. In fact, their last video call just 3 days ago showed their home looking perfectly normal through the window behind her. He stepped out of his SUV, his military duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and approached the barrier. A large sign posted on the concrete read, "City of Arlington, Water Main Replacement Project, Authorized Personnel Only." The date on the permit showed the work had begun just 1 week ago. "Excuse me, sir, you can't go in there," called a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see a construction worker in an orange hard hat walking toward him, clipboard in hand. "This is my house," Marcus replied, pointing toward the red brick home beyond the barrier. "I just returned from deployment and I need to get to my family." The construction worker looked skeptical, glancing between Marcus and the house. "Look, buddy, I've been working this site for a week now and nobody's been in or out of that house. The city evacuated all residents before we started digging. You sure you got the right address?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Evacuated? What do you mean evacuated? Where's my family?" His voice carried the edge of someone trained to handle combat situations, and the construction worker took a step back. "Hey man, I just dig holes and lay pipe. You need to talk to my supervisor about this stuff, but I can tell you for sure that house has been empty since we started work here." Marcus pulled out his cell phone and immediately dialed Sarah's number. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again, then attempted to call his 10-year-old daughter Emma. That phone was turned off too. His mind began racing through possibilities, each more troubling than the last. "Where's your supervisor?" Marcus demanded. "He's at the main office, about 10 minutes from here. But look, even if you are who you say you are, nobody's getting past this barrier today. We've got live electrical work going on in those trenches, and the gas lines are exposed. It's not safe." Marcus studied the construction site more carefully. His years of military experience had taught him to assess situations quickly and thoroughly. Something about this whole setup felt wrong. The construction equipment looked new, but the work appeared haphazard. The trenches were deeper than necessary for typical water main work, and he noticed that while his property was completely torn up, the neighboring houses were untouched. "When did you say this project started?" Marcus asked. "Last Monday. City inspector came by Friday before that. Said we had to get this whole section done before winter. Rush job, but the pay's good." Marcus calculated quickly in his head. Last Monday would have been exactly 2 days after his last successful conversation with Sarah. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. He walked around the perimeter of the construction area, looking for any sign of his family or clues about what had happened. As he rounded the corner to the backyard, he froze. Through the chain-link fence, he could see that the back door of his house was standing wide open, and the screen door was hanging off its hinges. "Something's very wrong here," Marcus muttered to himself. His military training kicked in automatically, and he began cataloging everything he observed. The construction timeline, the convenient timing with his return, the suspicious nature of the work, and most importantly, the complete disappearance of his family. He pulled out his phone again and called the Arlington City Hall. After being transferred 3 times, he finally reached someone in the water department. "This is Marcus Thompson at 1247 Maple Street. I just returned from military deployment to find my house blocked off for construction. Can you tell me about this water main project?" There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, I'm not showing any scheduled water main work on Maple Street for this year or next." "Are you sure you have the right street?" Marcus felt his stomach drop. "I'm looking right at the construction site. There's a city permit posted right here with your department's name on it." "That's impossible. Let me check with my supervisor. Can you give me the permit number?" Marcus read off the number from the sign. and after a few minutes on hold, the city employee returned to the line. "Sir, that permit number doesn't exist in our system. It looks like someone may have created a fake city permit. You need to call the police immediately." As Marcus hung up the phone, his military instincts fully engaged. This wasn't a simple mix-up or bureaucratic error. Someone had gone to elaborate lengths to block access to his house and make his family disappear. The question was who, and more importantly, why. He thought about his recent deployment and the sensitive operations he had been involved in. Had he made enemies? Was this retaliation for something his unit had done overseas? The possibilities were endless, but right now, finding Sarah and Emma was his only priority. Marcus walked back to his SUV, but instead of leaving, he opened the trunk and pulled out a small backpack. Inside were items he had hoped never to use on American soil: surveillance equipment, secure communication devices, and other tools of his trade. If someone thought they could make his family disappear while he was serving his country, they had severely underestimated who they were dealing with. As he prepared to take matters into his own hands, Marcus noticed a black sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there when he arrived. Two men in suits sat inside, and while they were trying to look casual, their posture and alertness screamed federal agents. The game, whatever it was, had clearly already begun. Marcus kept his movements casual as he organized his gear, but his eyes never left the black sedan in his peripheral vision. 20 years of special operations had taught him how to appear calm, while his mind raced through tactical assessments. The two men in suits were definitely watching him, and their positioning suggested they were prepared to move quickly if needed. He closed his trunk and walked toward the construction worker, who was now talking on a radio with someone. As Marcus approached, he caught fragments of the conversation that made his blood run cold. "Yeah, he's here now. Matches the description. No, he's not buying the construction story. What do you want us to do?" The construction worker noticed Marcus approaching and quickly ended his radio call. "Find your supervisor yet?" the man asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the nervousness in his voice. "Actually, I just called the city," Marcus replied, watching the man's reaction carefully. "Interesting thing. They don't have any record of this water main project. No permits, no scheduled work, nothing." The color drained from the construction worker's face. He reached for his radio again, but Marcus was faster. Years of hand-to-hand combat training took over as Marcus grabbed the man's wrist and applied just enough pressure to make him drop the radio, without causing permanent damage. "Let's try this again," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had interrogated enemy combatants. "Where is my family and who are you really working for?" I don't know what you're talking about, man. I just work construction. I don't know anything about your family." Marcus increased the pressure slightly. "The city has no record of this project. Your permit is fake. There are federal agents watching us from across the street, and my family disappeared exactly when this fake construction started. So I'll ask one more time, where are they?" Before the man could answer, Marcus heard car doors slamming behind him. He released the construction worker and turned to see the two men from the sedan approaching, their hands positioned near concealed weapons under their jackets. "Mr. Thompson," called the taller of the two men. "I'm Agent Davis, FBI. We need to talk." Marcus kept his hands visible but ready. "About what?" "About the fake construction blocking my house? About my missing family? About why federal agents are surveilling me in my own neighborhood?" Agent Davis stopped about 10 feet away, his partner flanking to the left. "About why your family is in protective custody, and why you're in more danger than you realize." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Protective custody? From what?" "I've been in Afghanistan for 18 months. What kind of danger could they possibly be in?" "Not from anything you did overseas," Agent Davis replied. "From something you witnessed before you deployed. Something that certain people hoped you would forget about during your time away." Marcus's mind raced back to the weeks before his deployment. He had been stationed at Fort Bragg, conducting routine training exercises. Nothing unusual had happened that he could remember. No sensitive operations, no classified incidents, nothing that would warrant this level of response. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said honestly. "I didn't witness anything that would put my family at risk." Agent Davis exchanged a glance with his partner. 3 weeks before you deployed, you were conducting night training exercises in the woods outside Fayetteville. Do you remember encountering anything unusual that night? Suddenly, the memory came flooding back. Marcus had been leading a small team through a navigation exercise when they stumbled upon what appeared to be a drug transaction. Several men in expensive suits were exchanging briefcases with individuals who looked like local dealers. What had struck him as odd was that one of the men in suits had been wearing a government identification badge. "The drug deal," Marcus said quietly, "but I reported that through proper channels. My commanding officer said it would be handled appropriately." "Your commanding officer was one of the men in suits," Agent Davis revealed. "Colonel Richard Hayes has been running a drug trafficking operation using military resources for 3 years. When you reported what you saw, it triggered an internal investigation, but Hayes found out about the investigation before we could move." Marcus felt the pieces falling into place. He had my family taken to keep me quiet. Not exactly. Hayes knew that a decorated Delta Force operator testifying against him would end his operation and probably his life. So he arranged for your deployment to be extended, hoping you would either be killed in action or that the evidence would disappear while you were gone. But I wasn't killed, and I'm back early. Exactly. Your unit was recalled unexpectedly due to mission changes. Hayes wasn't prepared for your early return. When he found out you were coming back, he panicked and had your family moved to protective custody, then set up this fake construction to buy time while he figured out his next move. Marcus looked around at the elaborate construction setup. "All of this just to block my house?" Hayes needed to control when and where you learned about the situation. If you had walked into an empty house with no explanation, you might have gone to local police or media. This way, he could monitor your reaction and decide how to handle you. The construction worker, who had been listening to this exchange with growing terror, suddenly bolted toward the construction equipment. Agent Davis's partner moved to intercept him, but Marcus was faster. He tackled the fleeing man near a pile of concrete barriers. "Please don't hurt me," the man gasped. "They said it was just surveillance. They didn't tell me it involved kidnapping a soldier's family." Marcus hauled the man to his feet. "Who hired you? Was it Hayes directly?" "No, some private security company. They said it was a matter of national security, that we were helping catch a traitor. They paid us triple overtime to set up this fake construction site and report on anyone who showed up." Agent Davis approached them. "Mr. Thompson, I know this is a lot to process, but we need to move quickly. Hayes knows you're back and he's running out of options. Desperate people do desperate things." "Where is my family?" Marcus demanded. "They're safe in a federal safe house about 2 hours from here. But Hayes has resources and connections. We can't guarantee their safety much longer without bringing this whole operation down." Marcus looked at the fake construction site, the federal agents, and the terrified contractor. His family was safe for now, but everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed during his military service, was being threatened by corruption within his own ranks. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Agent Davis smiled grimly. "We need you to help us catch Colonel Hayes in the act. But it's going to require you to put yourself in danger. Hayes thinks he has leverage over you because of your family. We want to let him think he's in control while we gather the evidence we need to take down his entire network." Marcus considered the proposal. It meant more time away from Sarah and Emma, more risk and more uncertainty. But it also meant ensuring that the man who had threatened his family would face justice. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked. As Agent Davis began explaining the operation, Marcus noticed more vehicles arriving on the street. This time they weren't federal agents. The men getting out of the dark SUVs wore tactical gear and moved with military precision. Hayes had apparently decided that subtle surveillance was no longer sufficient. The real confrontation was about to begin. Agent Davis immediately noticed the new arrivals and spoke urgently into his radio. "Control. We have unknown tactical teams moving in on our location. Request immediate backup." Marcus counted 6 men emerging from 2 black SUVs, all wearing military-style gear but no identifying patches or badges. They moved with the precision of special forces, spreading out to establish a perimeter around the construction site. Their weapons remained concealed but ready. "Hayes's private contractors," Agent Davis muttered. "He's escalating faster than we anticipated." Marcus assessed the situation with combat-trained eyes. The contractors were positioning themselves to control all exit routes from the area. Whatever Hayes had planned, he intended to contain it to this location. "We need to get out of here," Agent Davis said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Marcus replied firmly. "Running now just puts more civilians at risk and gives Hayes time to move my family again. We end this here." One of the contractors approached, holding up a hand in what appeared to be a peaceful gesture. He was older than the others, with graying hair and the bearing of a career military officer. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the man called out. "I'm Captain Morrison, Private Security. We're here on behalf of Colonel Hayes. He'd like to have a conversation with you." Marcus stepped forward, keeping his hands visible but ready. "Where is Colonel Hayes? If he wants to talk, he can come here himself." "The Colonel is concerned about your safety," Morrison replied. "There are people who want to harm you because of false accusations you've made. We're here to provide protection until this misunderstanding can be resolved." Agent Davis moved to stand beside Marcus. "Federal agents, Captain. This man is under our protection, and your presence here is interfering with an ongoing investigation." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Agent Davis, I believe there's been some confusion. Sergeant Major Thompson is needed for debriefing regarding his recent deployment. Military matters take precedence over civilian investigations. Not when military personnel are involved in drug trafficking and kidnapping." Davis shot back. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Marcus could see fingers moving closer to weapons on both sides. In a few seconds, this quiet suburban street could become a battlefield. "Stand down, all of you," Marcus commanded, using the voice that had led men through combat zones. "Morrison, you tell Hayes that if he wants to talk, he meets me face to face. No intermediaries, no private contractors, no games." Morrison spoke into a small radio, then listened to the response. "The Colonel agrees to meet. But it has to be on neutral ground, and you come alone." "No deal," Agent Davis interjected. "We're not letting you walk into a trap." Marcus was already calculating the odds. Hayes was obviously desperate, which made him dangerous but also prone to mistakes. If Marcus could get close enough to the Colonel, he might be able to end this without further risk to his family or innocent bystanders. "Where does he want to meet?" Marcus asked. "The old airfield outside town, 1 hour. Come alone or the meeting doesn't happen." Marcus knew the location, an abandoned military airfield that had been closed for years. It was isolated, with multiple escape routes and far from civilians. If Hayes was planning something violent, it was actually the perfect place to contain it. "I'll be there," Marcus said. "This is insane," Agent Davis protested. "It's obviously a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Marcus replied. "But Hayes is getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Besides, what choice do I have? He has my family." Morrison nodded and spoke into his radio again. Within minutes, the contractors were loading back into their vehicles. Before leaving, Morrison approached Marcus one more time. "Sergeant Major, the Colonel wants you to know that your family is comfortable and safe. This situation can be resolved peacefully if you're willing to be reasonable." "Define reasonable," Marcus said. "Forget what you think you saw 2 years ago. Accept that your memory of events may have been affected by combat stress. Sign a statement saying you were mistaken about the identity of the people involved." Marcus stared at Morrison for a long moment. "And if I refuse?" "The Colonel hopes it won't come to that." After the contractors left, Agent Davis was immediately on his radio calling for reinforcements and surveillance teams. "We'll have eyes on that airfield from every angle," he assured Marcus. "The moment something goes wrong, we move in." "How long do we have before the meeting?" Marcus asked. 55 minutes. "But you're not seriously considering going through with this." Marcus was already moving toward his SUV. "Hayes thinks he holds all the cards because he has my family, but he doesn't know that I know where they are, and he doesn't know that the FBI is involved. Those are advantages I can use. What's your plan?" Marcus opened his trunk again and began pulling out equipment. "Hayes is a career officer, used to having subordinates follow orders without question. He's also used to having superior firepower and backup. At that airfield, he'll expect to control the situation. And I'm going to do something he won't expect. I'm going to tell him the truth." Agent Davis looked confused. "What truth?" Marcus checked his weapon and secured it in a concealed holster. "That I remember every detail of what I saw that night. That I know he's been trafficking drugs using military resources, and that I'm willing to testify against him in federal court. That's not going to make him back down. That's going to make him try to kill you." "Exactly. Hayes thinks he's been clever, using intermediaries and private contractors to keep his hands clean. But when he tries to kill me himself, you'll have him on murder charges in addition to everything else." Marcus began checking other equipment: a small GPS tracker, a digital recording device, and the emergency beacon that would signal his exact location to federal agents. There's one thing Hayes doesn't know, Marcus continued. During my deployment, I wasn't just fighting insurgents. I was gathering intelligence on drug trafficking routes that connect Afghanistan to the United States. Routes that I'm betting connect directly to his operation. Agent Davis's eyes widened. You have evidence of the international connections? Names, dates, shipping routes, financial transactions, everything. Hayes thinks this is about one night of surveillance 2 years ago. He has no idea how deep this investigation really goes. Marcus slammed his trunk shut and faced Agent Davis. When I don't come back from that airfield meeting, Hayes is going to think his problems are over. That's when he'll get careless and you can take down his entire network. What do you mean when you don't come back? Marcus smiled grimly. Hayes is expecting a scared soldier who just wants his family back. Instead, he's getting a special operations veteran with 18 months of fresh combat experience and a complete understanding of his criminal enterprise. The question isn't whether I'll survive this meeting. The question is whether Hayes will. As Marcus climbed into his SUV, Agent Davis grabbed the door. This is suicide, Thompson. We can find another way. My family has been in hiding for a week because of this man. He's used his military position to profit from poison that destroys communities, and he thought he could intimidate me into silence while I was serving my country overseas. Marcus started the engine. There is no other way. This ends today. As he drove toward the abandoned airfield, Marcus thought about Sarah and Emma. By tonight, they would either be safely home, or they would be planning his funeral. But either way, they would be free from the shadow of Colonel Hayes' corruption. The sun was beginning to set as Marcus reached the turnoff for the old airfield. In the distance, he could see a single black helicopter waiting on the cracked tarmac. The abandoned airfield stretched out before Marcus like a scene from a post-apocalyptic movie. Weeds grew through cracks in the tarmac, and the old control tower stood empty with broken windows staring down at the landing strip. The black helicopter sat in the center of the airfield, its rotors slowly spinning as if ready for immediate departure. Marcus parked his SUV at the edge of the airfield and stepped out into the evening air. The sun was setting behind distant hills, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. He could see figures moving around the helicopter, but the distance and fading light made it difficult to identify individuals. As he walked across the cracked tarmac, Marcus activated the recording device hidden in his jacket. Every word spoken at this meeting would be transmitted to FBI agents positioned around the perimeter of the airfield. Agent Davis had assured him that sniper teams were in position, but Marcus knew that in a confrontation this close to the helicopter, their effectiveness would be limited. Colonel Richard Hayes stepped out of the helicopter as Marcus approached. Even in civilian clothes, Hayes carried himself with the rigid posture of a career military officer. He was flanked by 4 armed men who spread out in a defensive formation around the aircraft. "Sergeant Major Thompson," Hayes called out when Marcus was about 50 yards away. "Thank you for coming. I believe we have some things to discuss." Marcus continued walking until he was about 20 feet from Hayes, close enough to see the man's face clearly, but far enough to have room to maneuver if things went bad. "Colonel Hayes," Marcus replied formally, "I understand you have my family. I want them returned immediately." Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Your family is perfectly safe, Sergeant Major. They're being well cared for while we resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding would that be, sir?" "The night training exercise 18 months ago. You filed a report claiming you witnessed drug trafficking involving military personnel. That report has caused significant problems for ongoing operations." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I reported what I observed, sir. Several individuals were exchanging what appeared to be drugs for money. One of those individuals was wearing military identification. And you stand by that report?" "Every word of it," Hayes nodded slowly. "That's unfortunate, Sergeant Major. You see, what you actually witnessed was a classified operation. We were conducting surveillance on suspected drug dealers, and the military personnel you saw were undercover operatives." "If that's true, sir, then where are the arrest records? Where are the reports of this supposed surveillance operation?" Hayes' smile faded. "Some operations are so classified that they don't generate traditional paperwork, soldier. I would have thought someone with your security clearance would understand that." Marcus took a step forward. "What I understand, Colonel, is that you've been using military resources to traffic drugs. What I understand is that you kidnapped my family to keep me quiet. And what I understand is that this conversation is being recorded by federal agents who are positioned around this airfield right now. Hayes's composure cracked for the first time. His hand moved toward the weapon holstered at his side, and his men immediately raised their rifles. "You're making a serious mistake, Thompson," Hayes said coldly. "I've been protecting you from people who want you dead. The drug dealers you saw that night have put a price on your head. Your family is in protective custody because their lives are in danger. From who? From the dealers or from you? From very dangerous people who don't appreciate military interference in their business operations." Marcus laughed harshly. "You mean your business partners? The ones you've been working with for 3 years? The ones whose money you've been laundering through military contracts?" Hayes stepped back, his face going pale.
"How could you possibly know about the shipping routes through Afghanistan?"
"About the bank accounts in the Cayman Islands? About the modified military vehicles you've been using to transport drugs across state lines?" Marcus pulled out a thick envelope from his jacket. 18 months of deployment gave me a lot of time to investigate, Colonel, and a lot of connections in military intelligence to help me follow the money. Hayes stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What do you want?" "I want my family back. I want you to turn yourself in to federal authorities. And I want you to provide information about every person involved in your operation. And if I refuse," Marcus held up the envelope, "then copies of this evidence go to the FBI, the DEA, military criminal investigation, and every major news outlet in the country. Your operation dies, your partners get arrested, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison." Hayes was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. When he spoke again, his voice had the dangerous calm of a man who had made a final decision. "You know, Thompson, I really hoped we could resolve this peacefully. Your service record is exemplary. You're exactly the kind of soldier this country needs. But you're also a threat to an operation that generates millions of dollars annually and provides valuable intelligence on international drug trafficking. Sometimes good soldiers have to be sacrificed for the greater mission." Hayes made a subtle hand signal to his men, and Marcus immediately dove behind a pile of old concrete barriers, just as automatic weapons fire erupted across the airfield. Bullets sparked off the concrete and whined overhead as Marcus drew his own weapon and assessed his situation. 4 armed contractors with military training, plus Hayes, who was also armed. Open ground between his position and any meaningful cover, and a helicopter that could be used for either escape or as an elevated firing position. But Marcus also had advantages that Hayes didn't know about. The recording device had captured Hayes's admission of guilt. Federal agents were moving in from the perimeter, and 18 months of recent combat experience had kept his skills sharp. Marcus keyed the emergency beacon in his pocket, sending his exact GPS coordinates to the FBI tactical teams. Then he did something that Hayes wouldn't expect from a soldier pinned down by superior firepower. He went on the offensive. Moving low and fast, Marcus flanked around the concrete barriers toward the helicopter. If he could reach the aircraft, he could use it for cover and potentially prevent Hayes from escaping. The contractors adjusted their fire to follow his movement, but their muzzle flashes in the growing darkness gave away their positions. Marcus returned fire, forcing 2 of the contractors to seek cover behind the helicopter. He could hear Hayes shouting orders, but the sound of gunfire made it difficult to understand the words. Suddenly, the helicopter's engines roared to life, and the rotor blades began spinning faster. Hayes was preparing to escape, which meant Marcus was running out of time. He sprinted the final distance to the helicopter, diving underneath the aircraft just as it began to lift off. Through the open cabin door, he could see Hayes inside, speaking frantically into a radio. Marcus aimed his weapon at the helicopter's tail rotor and fired 3 precise shots. The aircraft immediately began spinning out of control as it lost anti-torque capability. The helicopter crashed back to the tarmac with a grinding impact of metal and breaking glass. Marcus rolled away from the wreckage, his ears ringing from the noise of the crash. In the sudden silence that followed, he could hear the distant sound of approaching sirens and the distinctive whop-whop-whop of federal helicopters converging on the airfield. Smoke and dust swirled around the crashed helicopter as Marcus cautiously approached the wreckage. The aircraft had come down hard on its side, with the main rotor blades shattered and debris scattered across the tarmac. Through the cracked windscreen, he could see movement inside the cabin. Colonel Hayes was trapped in the wreckage, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, but very much alive and still dangerous. Two of his contractors lay motionless nearby, victims of the crash and the firefight. The other two had taken cover behind an old fuel truck and were still shooting at anything that moved. Marcus kept low as bullets whistled overhead. The sound of approaching helicopters was getting louder, and he could see headlights from multiple vehicles racing across the airfield toward their position. Federal backup was almost here, but Hayes was trying to crawl out of the helicopter wreckage with what looked like a radio in his hand. "Thompson," Hayes shouted over the noise of engines and gunfire. "You have no idea what you've done. This operation has connections you can't imagine." Marcus moved closer to the wreckage, using pieces of the broken aircraft for cover. "It's over, Hayes. Your men are outnumbered and federal agents have the entire airfield surrounded." Hayes managed to pull himself partially out of the helicopter cabin. "You think this ends with me? I'm just middle management. The people I work for have resources that reach into every level of government." "Then you better start talking to the FBI about those people, because you're going to need all the cooperation credit you can get." Hayes laughed bitterly, then winced as the movement aggravated his injuries. "You still don't understand, do you? Your family wasn't taken to protect my operation. They were taken because someone higher up the chain wanted leverage over you specifically." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about? Your deployment to Afghanistan wasn't random, Thompson. You were sent there because someone wanted you to see specific things, to gather specific intelligence. The drug trafficking routes you uncovered weren't an accident. You were supposed to find them." The sound of vehicles screeching to a halt interrupted their conversation. FBI tactical teams poured out of black SUVs, their weapons trained on the remaining contractors. Agent Davis's voice boomed across the airfield through a megaphone. "This is the FBI. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." The two surviving contractors apparently decided that fighting federal agents wasn't worth whatever Hayes was paying them. They threw down their rifles and raised their hands in surrender. Marcus kept his weapon trained on Hayes as federal agents swarmed the crash site. "You're saying someone wanted me to investigate the drug routes?" Hayes nodded weakly. "There's a power struggle in the international drug trade. New players trying to muscle in on established territories. Someone needed an inside man with military credentials to document the old network so they could destroy it and take over. And you were part of the old network? I was a useful idiot, just like you. The difference is I figured it out and decided to profit from it. You kept playing the righteous soldier." Agent Davis reached them with a medic close behind to treat Hayes' injuries. "Thompson, are you hurt?" Marcus shook his head, still processing Hayes' revelations. "He claims my deployment was orchestrated. That someone wanted me to investigate the drug routes I found?" Davis looked troubled. "We'll sort that out later. Right now we need to get Hayes medical attention and into custody." As the medic worked on Hayes, the colonel grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "Thompson, your family is safe for now, but this isn't over. The people who really run this operation won't let you walk away with what you know. Where are they being held?" Marcus demanded. Hayes smiled weakly. "That information is my insurance policy. Cooperate with my debriefing and I'll make sure they're returned safely." Agent Davis intervened. "Colonel Hayes, you're under arrest for drug trafficking, conspiracy, kidnapping, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." As Davis read Hayes his rights, Marcus walked away from the crash site. The adrenaline from the firefight was wearing off and exhaustion was setting in, but his mind was racing with the implications of what Hayes had told him. If his deployment had been orchestrated, then someone with significant power and influence had been manipulating his military career for their own purposes. The question was who, and what they ultimately wanted from him. Agent Davis caught up with him as Marcus reached his SUV. "We found the safe house where your family was being held. They're safe, but we're keeping them in protective custody until we can sort out who else might be involved in this." Marcus leaned against his vehicle, suddenly feeling the weight of 18 months of combat and the stress of the last few hours. "How long until I can see them?" "We're arranging for you to be reunited tonight." "But Thompson, Hayes' claims about your deployment being orchestrated, we need to take that seriously. If there's a larger conspiracy here, your family could still be in danger." Marcus looked back at the crash site where Hayes was being loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. "What does the FBI know about international drug trafficking networks with connections to the military?" "More than I can tell you in an airfield parking lot, but I can say that your evidence from Afghanistan has already triggered investigations in multiple countries. You've opened a very big can of worms." "And someone knew I would?" Davis nodded grimly. It's starting to look that way. The question is whether they wanted you to expose the network to shut it down or to eliminate competition. A black SUV pulled up beside them, and Agent Davis received a radio call. After a brief conversation, he turned back to Marcus with a troubled expression. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "We just raided the safe house where your family was supposed to be. It was empty. They were moved again sometime in the last 2 hours." Marcus felt his heart sink. "Moved by who?" "We don't know yet. But whoever did it had advanced knowledge of our operation. Someone with access to federal communications has been feeding information to Hayes' network." Marcus climbed into his SUV and started the engine. "Where are you going?" Davis asked. "To find my family. With or without FBI help." Davis grabbed the door handle. "Thompson, you can't go off on your own. If there's a leak in federal law enforcement, you can't trust anyone. I can trust myself, and I can trust the men I served with in Afghanistan." Marcus pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he hadn't used since his deployment ended. It was answered on the first ring. "Snake Eyes here. Ghost Rider calling. I need the team for a domestic operation. Family extraction." There was a pause. "How many hostiles?" "Unknown number, but they have federal connections." "This is off the books. Roger that. Where do you need us?" Marcus looked at Agent Davis, who was listening to the conversation with growing alarm. "I'll send coordinates. Come heavy." As he ended the call, Davis stepped back from the vehicle. "Thompson, you're talking about bringing military operators into a domestic situation. That's illegal." "So is kidnapping a soldier's family," Marcus replied. "Hayes was right about one thing. This isn't over. And the next phase requires a different kind of operation." Marcus drove away from the airfield, leaving Agent Davis standing beside the wreckage of Hayes' helicopter. In his rearview mirror, he could see the federal agent speaking urgently into his radio. Within an hour, Marcus knew federal authorities would be looking for him as well as his family. But he also knew that somewhere out there, his Delta Force teammates were preparing for a mission that would bring Sarah and Emma home, regardless of what laws they had to break to do it. Marcus drove through the night to a predetermined rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse complex on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia. This was where his Delta Force team had agreed to meet for emergency situations, a place they had scouted years ago but never expected to use on American soil. As he pulled into the empty parking lot, Marcus saw 3 vehicles already waiting. Dark pickup trucks with tinted windows, the kind that could blend into any neighborhood or highway. His teammates had arrived ahead of schedule, which meant they understood the urgency of the situation. 4 men emerged from the vehicles as Marcus parked. Even in civilian clothes, they moved with the precise coordination of elite soldiers. These were men he had served with through multiple deployments, men he trusted with his life and the lives of his family. "Ghost Rider," called out the team leader, a compact man with graying temples known by his call sign Snake Eyes. "Situation report." Marcus quickly briefed them on everything that had happened: the fake construction, Hayes' arrest, the federal investigation, and most importantly, the fact that his family had been moved again by unknown parties with apparent federal connections. "So we're looking at a potentially hostile extraction with federal agencies involved?" asked Reaper, the team's sniper specialist. "Unknown at this point," Marcus replied. "We have to assume that whoever moved my family has resources and training. But our primary objective is extraction, not elimination." "Rules of engagement?" asked Blackout, their explosives expert. Marcus considered the question carefully. These men had followed his orders in combat zones around the world, but this was different. This was domestic soil, with American citizens and potential federal agents involved. Minimum necessary force, he decided. We're not at war with the American government. We're rescuing civilians from kidnappers who happen to have badges. Snake Eyes nodded approvingly. "Equipment?" "Full tactical gear, but non-lethal options preferred. Body armor, night vision, communications, and enough firepower to discourage resistance without starting a war." As his team prepared their equipment, Marcus's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The number was one he didn't recognize, but the message made his blood run cold. "Mr. Thompson, your family is safe, but their continued safety depends on your cooperation. Come alone to the address I'm sending. Any attempt to involve law enforcement or military personnel will result in immediate consequences for your wife and daughter." A second message arrived with GPS coordinates for a location. About 30 miles away, the remote estate in the Virginia countryside, Marcus, showed the messages to Snake Eyes. Thoughts? Classic hostage scenario. They want you isolated and vulnerable. The question is whether this is Hayes's people trying to clean up loose ends or someone else entirely. Based on Hayes's claims about my deployment being orchestrated, I'm betting it's someone else. Someone who's been pulling strings from the beginning. Snake Eyes studied the GPS coordinates. Rural location, probably multiple escape routes, definitely chosen for isolation. If we're going to extract your family from there, we need reconnaissance first. How long? Give us 2 hours for surveillance and tactical planning. We'll need to identify the number of hostiles, their equipment, the building layout, and your family's exact location inside. Marcus felt every minute ticking by like an hour. But he knew Snake Eyes was right. Going in blind would just get everyone killed. Do it, he agreed. But I'm going to that meeting. Whoever sent those messages is expecting me, and if I don't show, they might hurt Sarah and Emma. That's exactly what they want, Reaper protested. They want you isolated and under their control. Maybe, but they also want something from me. Or they would have killed my family already. As long as they think I might cooperate, Sarah and Emma are safe. Marcus checked his weapons and equipment one final time. 2 hours. If I'm not back by then, or if I send the abort signal, you extract my family regardless of what happens to me. Snake Eyes gripped his shoulder. We're not leaving anyone behind, Marcus. That includes you. As Marcus drove toward the coordinates, he thought about everything that had led to this moment. His military career, his deployment to Afghanistan, the intelligence he had gathered about drug trafficking routes, and now this elaborate conspiracy that seemed to have tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government. The GPS led him to a gated estate surrounded by high walls and mature trees. As he approached the entrance, the gates opened automatically, suggesting that his arrival was being monitored. He drove up a winding driveway toward a large colonial-style house with lights blazing in every window. 2 men in expensive suits waited on the front steps. They weren't military contractors like Hayes had used, but they carried themselves with the confidence of people accustomed to violence. As Marcus parked and stepped out of his vehicle, both men moved their jackets aside to reveal shoulder holsters. "Mr. Thompson," called the taller of the 2 men. "Thank you for coming. Please come inside. There are people who are very eager to meet you." Marcus followed them into the house, noting the security cameras, reinforced doors, and the subtle bulges under clothing that indicated multiple armed guards throughout the building. Whoever owned this place took security very seriously. He was led into a spacious library where a woman in her 60s sat behind an antique desk. She was elegantly dressed and could have been anyone's grandmother, except for the cold intelligence in her eyes and the way the armed guards deferred to her. "Sergeant Major Thompson," she said with a slight accent that Marcus couldn't place. "Please sit down. I believe you're anxious to see your family. Where are they?" "They're here and they're unharmed. But before we arrange that reunion, we have business to discuss." Marcus remained standing. "What business?" The woman smiled thinly. "The business of cleaning up the mess that Colonel Hayes created with his amateur drug trafficking operation. The business of ensuring that the intelligence you gathered in Afghanistan is used appropriately, and the business of offering you a choice that will determine whether your family lives or dies." "What choice?" "You can continue to cooperate with federal investigators, testify against Hayes, and eventually expose an entire network of operations that span multiple continents, in which case your family will be killed and you will be framed for their deaths." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but he kept his voice level. Or you can accept a new assignment. Use your military credentials and the trust you've built with federal agencies to provide us with advance warning of future investigations. In return, your family lives, you receive substantial compensation, and you help us transition to a more efficient operational structure. You want me to be a double agent? We want you to be practical. The drug trade will continue regardless of your cooperation. Colonel Hayes' arrest changes nothing except the identity of the people who profit from it. You can be part of the solution or you can be eliminated along with your family. Marcus looked around the room, cataloging the positions of guards and potential exits. Through a window, he could see more men patrolling the grounds. Even if his team arrived on schedule, extracting his family from this place would be extremely difficult. "I want to see my wife and daughter first," he said. The woman nodded to one of her guards who spoke quietly into a radio. A few minutes later, another guard escorted Sarah and Emma into the library. Marcus's heart nearly broke when he saw them. They appeared unharmed but terrified, and Emma ran to him the moment she saw him. "Daddy," she cried, wrapping her arms around his waist. Sarah followed, and for a moment Marcus allowed himself to believe that they might actually get out of this alive. "Are you hurt?" he asked them quietly. Sarah shook her head. "They've been civil. But Marcus, these people aren't just criminals. They know things about your deployment, about classified operations. Someone in the government is working with them." The woman behind the desk cleared her throat. "Your reunion is touching, but we have a schedule to keep. What is your decision, Sergeant Major?" Marcus looked at his family, then at the woman who held their fate in her hands. In his pocket, his phone vibrated twice, the signal that his team was in position and ready to move. "My decision," Marcus said, pulling Sarah and Emma closer to him, "is that you made one critical mistake." "And what would that be?" Marcus smiled grimly as he heard the faint sound of helicopters in the distance. "You assumed I came here alone?"